It was a quiet morning on Jake's farm. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft orange glow over the fields. The smell of fresh earth filled the air as Jake moved between the rows of crops, checking on his plants. He was a simple farmer, living a simple life. But something was different today. The peaceful silence of the morning was broken by the sound of footsteps, unfamiliar, slow, deliberate. Jake stopped, his hand on a bundle of wheat, and listened. The footsteps weren't from any animal he knew. They weren't even from a human. His heart started to race, a feeling of unease creeping up his spine. Who else would be walking around his farm this early in the morning? He turned his head toward the sound, his eyes scanning the horizon. The trees on the edge of his land seemed to be hiding something or someone. The figure was barely visible at first, moving through the thick foliage. But as it got closer, Jake could make out more details. It was a woman, or at least, she looked like one. Jake's breath caught in his throat. The woman was unlike anyone he had ever seen. She had blue skin, smooth and radiant, almost glowing in the soft light of the morning. Her features were sharp and alien, with high cheekbones and glowing eyes. Her hair was silver, long and flowing like a river of light. She wore simple, worn clothes, nothing like the fancy attire Jake had seen in the cities. But something about her presence made her seem out of place, to regal, too otherworldly. As the woman stepped closer, Jake's feet were rooted to the spot. He couldn't move. He had never seen anything like her, and he didn't know if he should be frightened or amazed. His hand slowly reached for the pitchfork by his side, but his body was frozen with a mix of curiosity and fear. She stopped just a few feet away from him, her eyes locking with his. Jake's breath hitched as the woman spoke, her voice clear and strong, yet calm. "Feed my hungry children, human," she said, her tone steady but with a deep desperation. "And I will work your fields." Jake stared at her, trying to process her words. His mind raced. Hungry children? What did she mean? How did she find him here? His farm was remote, far from the nearest town, and he hadn't seen anyone, human or otherwise, for days. "Who are you?" Jake asked, his voice cracking slightly. "What do you want?" The woman's expression softened, and she glanced down at the two small figures standing just behind her. Jake's eyes followed her gaze, and his stomach tightened. The children were small, their bodies thin and frail, their skin also a pale blue like their mother's. They were barely able to stand on their own, swaying slightly, their eyes wide and fearful. She gave him a small, weary smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "My name is Thara," she said softly. "These are my children. They are starving. We have no food, no shelter. I will work for you for them. Please feed them." Jake's heart clenched at the sight of the children, but the mystery of this woman only grew. How could this be? What was going on? And why her strange request? His farm barely provided enough for himself. How could he feed 3 more people, especially when they were not even human? But Thara's eyes held a look of such raw desperation that Jake couldn't turn away. There was something about her, something in the way she spoke, in the way she held herself, that made him hesitate. Despite the questions swirling in his mind, despite the doubt and fear, there was one thing that was clear. She was in need, and her children were suffering. He took a deep breath and nodded slowly. "All right," he said, his voice steadying. "I'll feed them, but why? Why should I trust you? What do you want in return?" The woman's eyes glinted with a quiet strength. "I only want to help," she said softly. "You will not regret this." Jake didn't know if he believed her. He didn't know what this meant for his future, or what kind of trouble he was inviting into his life. But as he looked at the children, fragile, weak, their eyes full of hunger and fear, he couldn't turn his back on them without another word. He turned and began to walk toward the farmhouse. Thara and her children followed silently behind, and as Jake glanced back at them, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far bigger than he could have ever imagined. Jake led the way to his farmhouse, the sound of his boots crunching softly on the gravel path beneath him. The woman, Thara, and her 2 children followed quietly, their footsteps light but purposeful. Jake could feel the weight of the moment, the sense that something was about to change, but he couldn't quite place his finger on what it was. When they reached the small wooden house, Jake turned to face Thara. "Wait here," he said, his voice low, I'll get the food." He didn't wait for her response before he stepped inside, his mind racing. He had no idea who these people were or what they really wanted. Yet, seeing the children so weak, so vulnerable, left him feeling like he couldn't turn them away. Inside the farmhouse, Jake moved quickly, gathering whatever food he could spare: a loaf of bread, a handful of apples, some cheese, and the last of his milk. He hesitated before grabbing a small sack of oats. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. As he packed the food together, his thoughts began to swirl. Was he making a mistake? Should he have asked more questions? Thara's words had been so cryptic, yet there was something undeniably compelling about her, a quiet strength that made it impossible for him to simply dismiss her. He emerged from the farmhouse and handed her the bundle of food, watching her closely. She didn't say anything at first, just took the food from his hands with a nod of gratitude. Her blue skin shimmered in the light as she carefully laid the food on the ground. In front of the children, they hadn't said a word either, staring up at the offering with wide eyes. Thara crouched beside them, her fingers gently tearing the bread into pieces, passing it to the children one by one. Jake watched as the children eagerly devoured the food, their hunger so evident that it made his heart ache. They ate like they hadn't seen food in days, maybe longer. It was painful to watch, but Jake couldn't help but feel a sense of helplessness. He had given them what he could, but would it be enough? As the children finished the food, Thara looked up at Jake, her gaze steady. "Thank you," she said softly. "You don't know how much this means to us." Jake nodded, not sure how to respond. The situation felt unreal, like something out of a dream, or maybe a nightmare. But there was no denying the impact this moment had on him. The woman before him, though alien, had shown more vulnerability and need than he could have ever imagined. Yet, something still didn't sit right with him. He had given them food, yes, but that didn't explain why they were here. Thara stood up, brushing the dirt from her hands, and met Jake's gaze again. "Now, I will work," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I will work your fields, as I promised." Jake didn't know how to feel about that. He had agreed to help her, but he hadn't expected her to be so eager to get to work. Most people he knew would have rested after a long journey or a hard day, but not Thara. She seemed driven, determined even. He had never seen someone so determined, especially not under these circumstances. As they walked to the fields, Thara's children stayed behind, watching their mother with awe. Jake glanced back, noticing the pride in their eyes. They were still weak, but there was a spark of hope in their gaze now, something that had been missing before. Thara reached the first row of crops and crouched down. Her hands moved with incredible precision, pulling the weeds from the soil and clearing the space around the plants. Jake watched, amazed at her skill. She worked quickly, and with a kind of grace that belied her rough appearance. Her movements were smooth, like she had done this her whole life. Jake had never seen anything like it. He had grown up farming, learning the ways of the land from his father, but this was different. The way Thara moved, the way she seemed to understand the needs of the crops. It was like she had an instinct for it, something deeper than what he had ever been taught. As she continued to work, Jake stood off to the side, watching her with growing curiosity. There was something about her, something that pulled at him. Was it the way she commanded the land with such ease, or was it the mystery surrounding her? The way she had appeared out of nowhere, bringing with her a strange sense of urgency. Thara paused for a moment, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. She glanced up at Jake, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You don't trust me," she said quietly, as if reading his mind. Jake shifted uncomfortably, not sure how to answer. "I don't know what to think," he admitted, "but I can see you're good at this, and I've already given you the food. I just don't understand why you're here." Thara smiled, though it was a bittersweet expression. "You will," she said softly, "in time. You will understand everything." Her words hung in the air, leaving Jake with even more questions than before. What was she talking about? What was her plan? He had no idea, but the growing sense that this was only the beginning left him feeling more uncertain than ever. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the fields, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that the life he knew was about to change forever. The days that followed were unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. Thara worked relentlessly, her strength and skill astonishing him. The crops in his fields grew faster than he had ever seen, almost as if the land itself responded to her presence. Each day, she would wake at dawn and begin her labor, her movements fluid and efficient. The children, though still weak, stayed close by, their eyes filled with a quiet gratitude. Jake couldn't help but notice how the children's health seemed to improve as well, their limbs no longer trembling with hunger, their faces slowly regaining color. But as the days passed, the unease inside Jake grew. Thara's skill at farming, her knowledge of the land, it was beyond anything he could comprehend. He had grown up on this farm, learned the ways of the soil from his father, and yet there was something about the way Thara worked that left him in awe. It wasn't just physical strength. It was as if she knew exactly what the crops needed, when they needed it, and how much. One evening, after a long day of labor, Jake sat on the porch, watching Thara in the distance as she worked. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of red and orange, and the air had a cool, calm quality to it. His mind raced with questions he hadn't dared ask until now. Why was she here? What was her true purpose? How did she know so much about farming, about the land? He had given her food, yes, but was that enough to trust her? He wasn't sure, but something about the way she carried herself, the way she looked at him with those glowing eyes, made it hard to believe she was just a lost wanderer. There was a depth to her, a mystery that was impossible to ignore. As if sensing his thoughts, Thara stopped her work and turned toward him. Her gaze met his from across the field. She had a way of looking at him, as if she could read every thought in his mind, every doubt. Jake felt a chill run down his spine, but he couldn't look away. There was something undeniable about her presence, something that drew him in. She began walking toward the porch, her steps sure and deliberate. When she reached him, she didn't sit or make any formal gesture. Instead, she stood there for a moment, staring at the horizon as the sun dipped lower. It was as though she was gathering her thoughts, choosing her words carefully. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "You wonder why I am here, don't you?" Jake nodded slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. "I don't understand," he admitted. "You've been helping me with the farm, but I don't know why. I don't know what you want from me." Thara's expression softened, but there was a hardness in her eyes that Jake couldn't quite place. She crossed her arms over her chest and sighed, looking up at the stars that were beginning to appear in the evening sky. "I come from a world far from here, a place where survival is harder than you can imagine. My people, we are struggling. We've lost our home, our resources. We've been wandering through the stars, searching for a place to live, a place to survive." Jake's breath caught in his throat. "So, you're not just a traveler. You're running from something?" Thara's gaze turned serious, her eyes intense. "We are running from everything," she said quietly. "My people, my children, they are all that's left. And I am here, on your land, because it is my last hope. We need your resources, your food, and I need your help to survive." Jake felt the weight of her words settle deep in his chest. Everything he had known, everything he had believed, suddenly felt distant, unreal. He had thought he was just helping someone in need, a stranger on the brink of survival. But now, with this revelation, it was clear that there was far more at stake than he had ever imagined. The quiet evening was suddenly filled with tension, the air thick with the weight of their conversation. Jake didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to turn away, to shut it all out, to go back to his simple life of farming and solitude. But another part of him, something deeper, felt connected to her struggle, to the pain in her eyes, to the desperation in her voice. He didn't speak for a long time. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, he looked at Thara and asked the question that had been gnawing at him ever since their first meeting. "Why me?" he asked. "Why did you choose my land, my farm?" Thara's expression softened, and for a brief moment, she seemed almost vulnerable. "Because your farm is one of the few places left untouched," she said quietly. "The land is fertile, and you are a man who understands it, even if you don't know how deeply." Jake looked at her, confusion still lingering in his mind. "What do you mean?" "You don't just grow crops, Jake," Thara said, her voice almost a whisper. "You are connected to the earth in a way few people ever are. You feel the land, its rhythms, its needs. And that is why I am here." Because I need your help to bring new life to my people. To survive. The weight of her words settled on Jake like a heavy stone. Everything had changed in that moment. The farm, the land, his life, it all meant something far greater now. What was happening here was not just a simple exchange of food and labor. It was the beginning of something much bigger. As the sun disappeared behind the hills, leaving only the soft glow of twilight, Jake realized that his life was no longer his own. It was intertwined with Thara's, with her children's, and with a future that was uncertain, but undeniably real. Jake woke the next morning to a strange sense of unease. The fields were calm, as they always were at sunrise, but something felt different now. Thara had been working the land tirelessly for days, and Jake had begun to feel the weight of her words the night before. She hadn't just come here out of need. She had come with a purpose, and though he had agreed to help her, something in the back of his mind whispered that the situation was more complicated than he could fully understand. As he walked outside to begin his day's work, he saw Thara again, already in the fields, her movements as fluid and deliberate as ever. Her children, now visibly stronger, sat on the edge of the farm, watching their mother with admiration. The sight was almost peaceful, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were all part of something much bigger than a simple farming agreement. Thara looked up as she noticed Jake approaching. She stood still for a moment, eyes narrowing as she watched him. He stopped in his tracks, feeling the weight of her gaze, but then she simply nodded at him, a small but meaningful gesture that made him feel both uneasy and understood. "I've been thinking," Jake said, his voice unsure, "about what you said last night, about why you came here. I need to know more, Thara. Why are you really here?" Thara sighed, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand, as though she had been expecting the question. "You don't trust me," she said, her voice gentle but steady. "That's all right. You shouldn't." Jake felt a pang of guilt. He didn't want to mistrust her. He didn't want to doubt her, especially after everything she had done for the farm, for his land. But there was something in her eyes, in the way she spoke, that hinted at a greater truth, one she wasn't ready to share. "Not yet." Thara took a deep breath, her eyes shifting to the horizon. "I told you before that my people are in danger. We are running from a war, from something bigger than you can understand. I didn't tell you everything then because I didn't want to overwhelm you. But you need to know the truth." Jake's heart quickened. Her voice had changed, becoming more serious, more urgent. He knew, without a doubt, that whatever she was about to say would change everything. "Many years ago," Thara began, her voice tinged with sadness, "my planet was destroyed. It was not a natural disaster. It was a war we didn't start, but one we couldn't escape. Our civilization was thriving, but we were wiped out by a force we couldn't fight. I watched my world fall apart, and now we are the last remnants of our people, scattered across the stars. We've been searching for a place to survive, to rebuild what we lost." Jake swallowed, trying to process what she had just said. He had known that there was more to her story, but this was beyond anything he had imagined. Thara wasn't just a stranger looking for food and shelter. She was part of something much larger, a lost civilization, fleeing from an unimaginable catastrophe. Thara continued, her voice becoming more urgent. "I came here because your world Earth is the last hope for my people. We need your resources, your land, and we need it now. The war that destroyed my planet didn't end there. It's still out there, hunting us. And if we don't find a way to survive, we will perish. My children, my people, everything will be lost." Jake stood silent for a long moment, the weight of her words pressing down on him like a physical force. He had always believed his life was simple. He farmed, lived in peace, and kept to himself. But now, this woman, this alien, had brought a truth so far beyond his comprehension that it left him breathless. "So, you want me to help you survive?" Jake said, trying to wrap his mind around it. "But why trust me? Why not go to a city, find someone who has more resources?" Thara's eyes softened, and she stepped closer, her voice low. "Because, Jake, your farm is the only place that is untouched. Your land is fertile and strong, something my people need. But more than that, you have something they don't, something that they could never understand. You have hope." Jake frowned. "Hope?" Thara nodded. "Yes, hope is something that can't be measured, something that can't be found in resources or weapons. It's a belief that even when all seems lost, something good can still come from it. My people, we've lost that. We've lost our sense of hope. But your simple life, your connection to the land, the way you've trusted me, even when you didn't fully understand, I can see it. It's there in you. And that's why I came here, to your farm, to find hope. Jake stood there for a long time, trying to digest what she had said. She wasn't just asking for food or shelter. She was asking for something deeper, something he wasn't sure he could give. She was asking for trust. She was asking for a chance to rebuild, to create something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed. The silence between them stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy, filled with the weight of what had been revealed, the responsibility now sitting squarely on Jake's shoulders. This wasn't just about farming anymore. This was about survival, not just for her people, but for his as well. Finally, Jake spoke, his voice steady. "All right," he said. "I'll help you, but we'll have to figure this out together. You and me. I don't know what's coming, but I'll be here." Farah's expression softened, and for the first time, Jake saw a glimpse of relief in her eyes. She had told him the truth, and now, together, they would face whatever came next. The days began to blur together as Jake worked alongside Farah. The fields flourished under her care, and the once struggling farm transformed into something vibrant and full of life. Crops he hadn't been able to grow in years now stood tall, healthy, and thriving. But with every passing day, the unease in Jake's chest only grew heavier. The promise of survival, of hope, was becoming more and more difficult to reconcile with the nagging doubts that still lingered in the back of his mind. It was the night after another long day of work when the true weight of the situation began to settle in. The stars were brighter than usual, the night sky clear and expansive. But Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Farah had been distant lately, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon, her movements faster and more deliberate than before. She had never shared much about her past, and despite her words about the war, there was still so much she had left unsaid. Jake stood on the porch, staring out into the vast, quiet fields. The wind had died down, and the silence was eerie. Then, as if on cue, he heard the familiar sound of footsteps behind him. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Farah's presence was unmistakable, like the air itself shifted when she was near. "Jake," she said softly, her voice quiet yet urgent. "We need to talk." He turned slowly to face her, noting the change in her expression. Her eyes, which had once seemed filled with a quiet strength, were now shadowed with something darker. Fear, worry. He couldn't tell. "I've been thinking about what you said the other day," Farah continued, her tone cautious. "About why I came here. About why I need your help. I didn't tell you everything, Jake. I didn't tell you about the real reason I sought your farm, your land." Jake's pulse quickened, a knot forming in his stomach. He had suspected that there was more to the story, but hearing Farah admit it out loud felt different, more real, more dangerous. "What do you mean?" Jake asked, his voice barely a whisper. Farah glanced over her shoulder, as if ensuring no one was watching, before stepping closer. She lowered her voice. "The war I spoke of, what I didn't tell you, isn't just a war for survival. It's a war for power. A war my people are losing. The ones who destroyed my planet, they didn't just kill us. They took everything we had, our resources, our future. And now, they're coming for Earth." Jake felt his blood run cold. "Coming for Earth?" he repeated, disbelief creeping into his voice. "You mean they're coming here?" Farah nodded gravely, her eyes never leaving his. "Yes, and they won't stop until they take everything. They won't care if your people survive or not. They only care about what they can control. And they've found Earth, Jake. They've found us." The reality of her words hit Jake like a punch to the gut. The peaceful life he had known, the quiet mornings on his farm, the slow rhythm of his days, it was all about to change. But how could he, a simple farmer, stand against something so vast, so dangerous? Farah's voice broke through his thoughts. "I didn't want to tell you, because I didn't want to put you in danger. But you deserve to know the truth. The resources you have here, your crops, your land, they aren't just valuable to us. They are the key to what's left of our survival." Jake's mind raced as he tried to make sense of it all. "But why me? Why my farm?" Farah stepped closer, her gaze intense. Because you have what we need, the strength of this land. It's the only place left with enough resources to grow what we need to fight back. And it's the only place we can hide, at least for now. But the more time we waste, the closer they get. They're already tracking us, Jake. They're already on their way. Fear gripped Jake's chest. He had thought he was helping someone in need, offering food, offering shelter. But this was something far more dangerous. This was a battle for survival, not just for Thara's people, but for Earth itself. What do you want me to do? Jake's voice cracked with the weight of it all. Thara's eyes softened. But there was no time for comfort, no time for reassurances. I need you to trust me. I need you to prepare. The time for hiding is over. We need to fight. We need to gather everything we can and protect this land, protect what's left of humanity. If we fail, we lose everything. Jake swallowed hard, the reality of it all settling like a heavy stone in his gut. His life had never been about fighting. It had been about farming, about working the land, about survival in its simplest form. But now, he stood at the edge of something far bigger than he could have ever imagined. The fight wasn't just for survival anymore. It was for the future of his world, for the future of everything he had known. He looked at Thara, her face illuminated by the dim light of the stars. She wasn't just an alien anymore. She was his ally, his partner, and now they shared a common enemy. The weight of their situation pressed down on him, but there was no turning back. "All right," Jake said, his voice steady with a new resolve. "I'll help you. We'll do whatever it takes." Thara nodded, a flicker of gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Together, we'll protect this world." And in that moment, as the first distant rumble of thunder rolled across the sky, Jake knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Jake had never imagined his life would come to this, working side by side with an alien, preparing for a war he hadn't even known existed. But Thara's urgency was contagious. Every day, she guided him through tasks he never thought possible, fortifying the farm, gathering supplies, and preparing the land in ways he couldn't have imagined. The crops he had once tended to with care now felt like an essential resource, a lifeline for not just him, but for something much larger than his small, quiet existence. But it wasn't just the physical work that wore on Jake. The weight of the truth Thara had shared the destruction of her people. The looming threat of the enemy sat heavily on his chest. Each night, as the stars emerged above, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were all being watched, that something was waiting for them to make a mistake, to slip up. It was a constant, nagging presence that never left. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, Thara took Jake aside. She had grown more intense over the past few days, her once calm demeanor now shadowed by something darker. He could see the worry in her eyes, the constant watchfulness. She had stopped smiling as often, and there was a new sharpness to her movements, as though every action was calculated, planned. "We don't have much time," she said, her voice low and urgent. "I can feel them getting closer. They know we're here." Jake felt his heart race, his pulse quickening. "What do you mean? How can you feel them? What's happening?" Thara's eyes narrowed as she looked out across the land. "They've been tracking us for weeks. The warlords who destroyed my people. They have technology that can detect any life signs. They'll come for the crops first, then they'll come for us. We need to act fast." Jake swallowed hard, the magnitude of the situation settling in. "What do you want me to do? I'm just one man. I can't fight an army." "You won't have to fight alone," Thara said, her voice steady. "I've made contact with some of my people. There's a resistance, scattered across the stars, hiding, waiting for the right moment to strike back. They're coming, but they'll need time to get here. Until then, we have to hold our ground. This farm, this land, is our first line of defense." Jake felt a chill at the thought of a battle, but he knew Thara wasn't asking him to become a soldier. She was asking him to defend what he loved, what they both depended on: the land, the crops, the very earth beneath their feet. "How?" he asked, his voice trembling. "How do we hold off something we can't see, something that powerful?" "We'll use the land," Thara said, her eyes lighting up with a fierce determination. "We've already started fortifying it, but now we need to be smarter. The crops, the trees, everything, these aren't just resources. They're our protection. We'll set up a network of traps, hidden barriers, and signal systems. We'll make this place look like a farm to anyone who walks through here. But it will be anything but. Jake nodded, his mind racing as he began to see what she meant. They weren't just preparing for survival anymore. They were preparing for war, but on their own terms. They were turning the farm into a fortress, using what they had to defend themselves. Over the next few days, Jake and Thara worked tirelessly. They set up barriers along the perimeter of the farm, camouflaging them with vines and trees to make them undetectable. They planted false crops in strategic locations, making it appear as though the farm was a decoy. Every inch of the land was being used, every corner fortified. Thara's alien knowledge, combined with Jake's understanding of the land, made them an unstoppable team. But as the days wore on, the tension between them grew. Thara was becoming more distant, her focus entirely on the task at hand. She barely spoke, only giving Jake the occasional command or instruction. The air between them felt heavy, thick with the unspoken knowledge that time was running out. Jake could feel it to the dread that hung in the air, the anticipation of something terrible about to happen. One night, as they finished setting up another trap along the far end of the field, Jake stopped and looked at Thara. Her face was illuminated by the soft glow of the moon, and for the first time, he noticed how tired she looked. The once regal alien woman was now worn down, her eyes hollow with exhaustion. "You're not telling me everything, are you?" Jake asked quietly, his voice laced with concern. Thara met his gaze, her expression unreadable. For a moment, she didn't answer. Then, with a soft sigh, she spoke. "There's more," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The warlords who are coming, they don't just want our land. They want me. They want to use me to find the last of my people. If they get to me, they'll have everything they need to destroy what's left of us. I won't let them." Jake's heart raced as the truth sank in. Thara wasn't just fighting for survival. She was fighting for her very existence. "I won't let them take you," Jake said firmly, stepping closer to her. "We'll do whatever it takes." Thara's eyes softened for a moment as she placed a hand on his arm. "Thank you, Jake, but we must be ready. When they come, it won't be just a fight for survival. It will be a fight for everything." Jake nodded, his resolve solidifying. He wasn't just protecting the farm anymore. He was protecting her, and he would do whatever it took to keep her and humanity safe. The days leading up to the arrival of the warlords felt like an endless stretch of time, each passing moment weighed down by anticipation. The farm was ready. The traps, the barriers, the false crops, all of it had been set up meticulously. Jake and Thara had worked side by side, their hands worn and tired, their eyes constantly scanning the horizon. It had become clear that they weren't just preparing for an invasion. They were preparing for the end of everything they knew. But despite the exhaustive effort, Jake couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. The calm before the storm always felt heavier when you knew what was coming. He found himself waking in the middle of the night, staring out at the fields, watching for any signs of movement. The stars, so bright in the dark sky, seemed to mock him with their quiet beauty. It was as if the universe was indifferent to the battle that was brewing on Earth. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting everything in deep orange and purple hues, Thara came to him. Her face was shadowed, her posture stiff like a soldier preparing for battle. She had grown more solemn as the days went by, her once warm eyes now distant, haunted by memories of a war that Jake couldn't comprehend. "They're close," she said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet fear. "I can feel them. It won't be long now." Jake nodded, his hands clenched at his sides. He had never been in a fight like this before, never imagined he'd be standing on the front lines of something so unimaginable. He was just a farmer, after all. Yet here he was, standing at the precipice of a war for the future of his world. "What do we do now?" Jake asked, his voice low. His gaze met hers, searching for reassurance, but finding none. "Now," Thara said, her voice firm, "we wait. And we prepare for what's to come. You've done all you can, Jake. We've done all we can. The rest is up to fate." That night, they sat together in silence, watching the stars. It was an eerie calm, the kind of quiet that preceded the most violent storms. The air felt charged, heavy with tension. The wind barely stirred the trees, as if the land itself was holding its breath. It felt like the world was waiting for something to happen, waiting for the first sign that the warlords had found them. As the hours passed, Jake's thoughts raced. What would the warlords do when they arrived? Would they immediately attack? Would they bring their full force to bear on the farm? Or would they be more strategic, testing their defenses, looking for weaknesses? Whatever it was, Jake knew one thing for sure: they couldn't afford to make a mistake. Suddenly, there was a sound in the distance. A low hum, barely perceptible at first, but growing louder, closer. Jake froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Thara's head snapped toward the sound, her eyes narrowing. "They're here," she whispered, her voice filled with dread. "Get ready." Jake grabbed the rifle he had kept hidden beneath the floorboards of his house, the one his father had left behind, the one that had never seen a real battle. He was no soldier, but he didn't need to be. He had the land, and he had Thara, and he would fight to protect both. The sound grew louder, now unmistakably the sound of something massive approaching. Thara's eyes gleamed in the dim light, her face hardening with determination. "We have one chance, Jake. One chance to stop them before they reach us." Jake nodded, his grip tightening around the rifle. He knew this wasn't just a fight for the farm. This was a fight for survival, for a future he hadn't even begun to imagine. He had thought that this farm was his world, that the land was all he needed. But now, standing beside Thara, he realized that the land was just the beginning. This was bigger than him, bigger than Earth. "They're getting closer," Thara said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "We have to act now." The air felt thick, oppressive, as if the entire world was holding its breath. Jake's heart raced in his chest, and for a moment, he wondered if he could really do this. Could he fight for something that wasn't just his own? Could he defend a world he hadn't even known was in danger? He wasn't sure, but he knew one thing: he couldn't let Thara down. Not after everything she had shared with him. Not after all the sacrifices they had made together. "Let's go," Thara said, her voice cutting through his thoughts. "This is it." They moved quickly, making their way toward the first set of defenses. Jake's eyes scanned the horizon, his senses on high alert. In the distance, he could see the outlines of shapes moving against the dark sky. The warlords were here, and they were not going to stop until they had what they came for. Jake took a deep breath, raising the rifle, his hands steady despite the fear flooding through him. He glanced at Thara one last time, meeting her gaze. She gave him a nod, her eyes filled with a strength he had come to rely on. Together, they were ready for whatever came next. The first wave of invaders broke through the tree line, their shadows sharp against the twilight. And with that, the fight for survival began. The war was no longer a distant threat. It was real, and it was here. Jake tightened his grip, his heart pounding with a fierce resolve. This was their world, and he would do whatever it took to protect it.